Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidos al cuarto capítulo de nuestro podcast Warriors of Love Dynasty. Hoy tenemos con nosotros a Ruwan, que es un mentor increíble que ayuda a los hombres a liberar todo su potencial y a dejar de lado sus vidas apáticas y sin propósito. Ruwan es experto en conectar con la parte inconsciente e instintiva de los hombres para transformarla en eficacia para que puedan alcanzar sus objetivos. En el podcast de hoy hablaremos sobre la masculinidad tóxica, sobre el trabajo con arquetipos y cómo encarnarlos de manera positiva en tu vida, y sobre la maestría sexual y el dominio de la energía y la excitación para potenciar tu salud y tus relaciones de pareja. Recordad que todos los extractos más interesantes los vais a tener subtitulados en castellano en nuestro canal de YouTube y de Instagram. Así que esperamos que disfrutéis mucho y aprendáis con este podcast, ya seas hombre o mujer.
Welcome to a new episode of Warriors of Love Dynasty podcast. We are here today with Ruwan. I'm Santiago Velasco and I'm with my colleague Dani. Dani.
¿Qué tal, Santiago? Un placer estar aquí de nuevo hoy con Ruwan, un hombre muy inspirador, muy interesante, así que vamos a ello.
Great. So Ruwan, the first question we like always asking is how would you define your work or your purpose in this world?
I would say, there's many ways I've answered this before, but I would say I help men with their hero's journey. Like everyone, when we have transformations, we go into a different way of thinking, way of being, so that we could come out as a different person. And I usually meet people somewhere in the beginning, and I help them reach the end more in a more fun and a beneficial way.
It's curious because it seems that we're all men. Like our idea behind this project is actually helping men and women in this process of transformation needed in this 21st century, in this century of exponential changes, put it this way, with technology and all the cultural and social evolution that has been going on. What would you feel, because you work with men, do you work also with women?
I used to work with women. Recently, I've shifted my interest into men's psychology. So most of what I share on my podcast is for men. And I kind of felt like if I want to go deep, I mean, I don't really have business telling a woman about her body or her emotions. I can say my opinions, but I only know my experience and I can share from my experience. So I really only work with men now. I don't turn away women, but I speak to a male audience. I speak about men's topics more nowadays.
And curiously enough, is it possible that I've heard also in your podcast that still you do have a pretty big audience of women in your podcast?
Yeah, it's funny. My podcast, according to Spotify at least, is 35% women. And women sometimes write me on email or Instagram saying, hey, I know your podcast is for men, but I find it interesting, or I feel like you're speaking to my masculine side. And I don't know, I guess that's fine. I don't care who listens. But yeah, about 1 out of 3 listeners are women for some reason.
That's amazing. And that's why we decided to create this community mixed, because we kind of feel that it's also important for us men to see the processes that women are going on, are having, and they're involved in, and also for women to see the processes we as men are having and we are involved in. So that's regarding great. Men, where do you think that men are right now? Like standing right now, what are the conflicts we are experiencing, like generally as men?
Yeah, well, it's hard to answer generally because there's so many different pockets and subcultures of men who are too this way or men who are too that way. But I think in general, and maybe this has been the case forever through all history, it's like a yin and yang conflict. It looks different now, but between masculine impulses and feminine impulses, they don't necessarily go together. And, something that's new for our generation are things like nice guy syndrome, men being too effeminate, men not knowing, forgetting how to be masculine. I mean, that's not something our grandfathers really dealt with, it seems. They had other problems. So now I think culture has swung to be a much more feminine, to maybe correct for some of the negatives of hypermasculinity. And I think in general, that's more of the issue with men these days, or how to integrate their masculinity. It's a lot of men, especially younger guys, I think are confused because of that.
Yeah, I would say it goes like that. Like older guys seem to have like a bit more of difficulty connecting maybe with their feminine side or their emotion, while younger generations are very connected to their feminine or emotional side, but they just are turned from side to side by they don't have like this masculine integration to be able to hold in a healthy way their feminine energies, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So
Yeah.
you especially work or focus on the integration of the masculine, correct?
Yeah, mostly, because I think especially nowadays, a lot of guys don't know what their authentic masculinity is. And specifically what I mean by masculinity are traits that come from testosterone that lead to beneficial things. Obviously, every testosterone trait can also go too far. I mean, defending your family can turn into being a murderer, or all these things, you know, if you go to extremes. But all of these traits evolve for a purpose. Our like million or that many thousands of years ago, our ancestors, our male ancestors, needed to embody certain characteristics to benefit their families, their tribe, to pass on their genes, to become us. And we should not throw those away, mainly because we still have that wiring. So nowadays we don't have to hunt our food or, kill a giant cat, that you don't have to do that. You can just go to the grocery store and buy your food. But there's certain things that give us like this primal feeling of positive mental health, let's say, or positive emotions. And those impulses have to be validated, because if they don't get expressed, weird things happen. You end up, expressing your masculinity in some weird way, or you feel like you just feel not yourself. Anyway, it's a lot, but I think there's a lot of the issues people have is just denying their impulses, essentially.
What do you think when you hear toxic masculinity? It's something that is being talked a lot about right now in the culture.
The term by itself is fine, because I don't use the word toxic, but yeah, I mean, some masculine impulses, like to rape and murder, those are masculine impulses, right? Like people with low testosterone don't feel that. People with high testosterone, really high testosterone, with no empathy, maybe they want to rape and murder. Like that's a male thing, right? It's fine. It's fine to call that toxic, I mean. But the way it's used in culture is like people flip it around to mean, oh, masculinity must be toxic. And I think that is a unfortunate idea, because yeah, for the same reason I just said, we need these for our mental health, but also the reason why they're mentally rewarding or emotionally rewarding is that they are actually useful for survival. Like maybe we don't have to hunt, but that same impulse to conquer will make you successful in business, will make you a good father in some ways. I mean, these impulses have healthy outlets still, and we need them, and the people who relate to men need them. Families, wives, girlfriends, mothers, I don't know. Like this is what makes men useful.
Totally. And I feel that's one of the problems we're experiencing right now when it comes to sense making. It's making the same of masculinity and the unhealthy expressions of masculinity, right? So there's kind of there's kind of a neglection of the unhealthy expressions of the masculine that I always try to not call it, at least from my perspective, not call it toxic masculinity, but really wounded masculinity, because it comes from all these wounded and shadow aspects that haven't been processed, and that's what makes them show up in the world as these toxic traits that really are present in every human being. But when it comes to men in their masculine, they express themselves as toxic masculinity, right? So right now, when it comes to toxic masculinity and when it comes to toxic behaviors, that's generally where I stand. So Danny wants to ask a question right now. Danny, I'm gonna.
Yes. Yo quería preguntarte, Ruwan, por cuál es la experiencia, digamos, que has tenido en tu vida. Sé que todo esto es un camino, es un proceso, no es algo que sea puntual, pero sí que nos contaras un poquito resumido cuál ha sido esta experiencia que te ha llevado a este momento, al hombre que eres ahora mismo, cómo ha sido un poco ese trabajo, esas circunstancias de vida que te llevan a este momento.
Yeah, Danny's asking what has been your journey when it comes to developing and evolving as a man, and to see all these difficulties and all these problems around masculinity and men.
Yeah, well, I think it started as a younger person, as a child. Actually, I was very low in confidence and very anxious, and I often felt like a beta male, even though I didn't use those words yet. And the first things that I came across, that a lot of people come across, is dating advice that would eventually become the pickup artist community. So I consumed a lot of that because that was the only, at the time, this is maybe early 2000s, 2002, the only thing that was available on the internet was this is how you become a man advice. And of course, if you feel low confidence and you're going through puberty, you really want to connect with women. So that's maybe your obsession. But speeding ahead a few years, I found that it really made me feel dead inside, and I had kind of suppressed my emotions in order to have a certain kind of appearance or a certain mask with relating to women, but also trying to be confident. It never felt real. And it actually led to me feeling very apathetic and kind of dead inside. But also it kind of ruined my sexual function because I was so disconnected from my feelings that I couldn't really feel my own arousal anymore. And that led me into another path, going to the very feminine path of really connecting with my feelings. I ended up joining a matriarchal cult, very opposite. Weird stuff happened, but really getting me in touch with my feelings. And then since then, that was my mid-20s, I've been kind of integrating these two experiences in what I feel is integrated masculinity, or what's useful to men. It is important to feel your emotions, but it's also important to have stable emotions. Like, one of the issues I think with guys going too far in their feminine is they want to feel every feeling, and I don't even go too far into this, but basically part of the masculine role in a polarized situation is to allow stability. And it's important to feel your emotions, and it's important to be able to put a stable container around them so you can do things, you can handle whatever issues. But anyway, to answer your question, that's basically been my journey in the last 15 years or so.
Thanks.
So I'm curious about your experience in the matriarchal cult, because the first time I heard about it, it was like, what is that? Like, does it even exist? Like, I don't know what he's referring to really when he's talking about this. And it really had a very big impact in your life journey, right? Because you're right now writing a book about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the company was called One Taste. It was a female-run sexual wellness company. The reason why I call it a cult is because they also brainwashed people and took their money and did weird stuff behind the scenes. But I first heard about it on TED. I don't know if they have it in Spain. They must have it in Spain, actually. TED Talks.
Yeah, that's worldwide.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I wasn't sure. The founder had a TED Talk. I watched it in college, and something about it like blew my mind. Like, something about the way she was speaking about intimacy and real connection, or connected to sexuality. I'd never really heard anyone speak about that before. And 5 years later, Tim Ferriss, who was one of my favorite writers, So I love the 4-hour work week. He wrote the 4-hour body, and the sex chapter was kind of written by One Taste, or written with One Taste. So I was like, this is a sign I have to learn about this. This was the same year I was dealing with erection issues, because I was doing too much. I was doing too much pickup stuff. Honestly, I was just becoming a robot, and yeah, and then I ended up going all the way, and I ended up moving into their ashram in New York. Basically, for 2 years, all I did was learn sexual practices and what they would call magic. Like being able to. I don't know how to put this into words that don't make me sound silly, but like being able to affect reality using your feelings. Essentially, that's one thing they taught, and yeah, it was a very transformative experience for me.
So Danny wants to follow up with questions here. Danny, ¿quieres hacer una pregunta?
Sí, me interesa también mucho. Conozco un poco el trabajo de Ruwan, he estado en algún pequeño curso que hace que me encantó, la verdad, y me encantaría también un poco que nos hablara un poco más de la importancia, porque sé que tiene ese dominio y que trabaja bastante con este aspecto de los distintos arquetipos, ¿no? Tanto en hombres como en mujeres, pero sobre todo por lo que nos ha contado, ahora está más centrado en el trabajo con hombres, cómo pueden ayudar los arquetipos del inconsciente colectivo, ¿no? De guerrero, mago, rey, amante y muchos otros, que sé que habla de ellos en sus podcasts. ¿Cómo pueden ayudar los arquetipos en el trabajo para que el hombre profundice en su esencia y en su camino con la mayor autenticidad? Esa es la pregunta.
Yes, so the question is, well, Danny has been following your work for long, and you work a lot with archetypes, and he's asking, how do you think, well, first I would ask, like, what are archetypes really, and how do you think they can help us develop and grow as men?
Yeah, so I'll use Carl Jung's. Carl Jung came up with the term archetypes, so I'll use his definition, which is that they are patterns of thoughts and feelings in our unconscious. And he actually compares them to genes in the same way that our DNA has certain pieces of it, genes that have persisted over time because they were useful, like maybe the gene for brown eyes was useful for many of your ancestors, which is why we have brown eyes, not blue eyes, for instance. Archetypes are the same thing, but in the psyche. So there might have been a pattern that we now call the warrior, in quotes, which is like an aggressive part of you that wants to conquer and do things in reality. And we have that programming, or we have those thoughts and feelings and patterns of behavior, because for thousands of generations, our male ancestors sometimes had to be warriors. I mean, I think Danny mentioned King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Like those are Gillette and Moore's. Gillette and Moore wrote a book titled that. Those are 4 archetypes. I mean, there's many ways to slice archetypes. You can call one the hero. You can call it whatever you want, but they're patterns. And the reason why it's useful is that, as we spoke about, we need to find, if we don't want to have toxic expressions of masculinity, and we want to be mentally healthy, and we want to be attractive and confident and useful to human beings that we know and to ourselves, we want to know what our natural instincts are, impulses are, and find healthy outlets. And archetypes are one way. There's many other ways, but archetypes are one way of conceptualizing, okay, I have a warrior in me, meaning I have patterns where I want to fight, I want to conquer, I want to accomplish things, I want to explore. How do I express that in my life in a way that's constructive? We could argue that people who don't identify that or don't have that self-awareness, maybe they're the ones who get into bar fights and do things that are not very constructive. But maybe if you recognize, okay, I have a very strong warrior archetype, let me start a business, or let me take jujitsu classes, or let me do something so this part of myself, this character in my unconscious, can feel like, okay, I feel good, I feel validated, I feel useful, and it'll help other parts of your life. So, I mean, we could say that about any part of ourselves, but essentially it's getting to know what's inside of you and then using it.
And archetypes, they're universal, right? It's not like they're culturally culturally determined. Like across cultures, there are like patterns of behavior that have evolved through human evolution, and they are all inside us. Like, and they can be more present in different individuals, in different quantities, put it this way, but they're still, we can all access and connect with all these patterns because it's part of our human nature, and it's in the collective unconscious.
Yeah, well said. Because if they were only like, if only people in France had a certain archetype, it wouldn't be an archetype. It would just be a thing that French people do, right? Like, it's called an archetype because everyone has it. It's that's what the prefix arch in archetype means. It's universal. Yeah.
It's interesting because, for example, in Buddhism, like you start doing like meditations and start meditating on a Buddha, and each Buddha can have a different quality. But what you're doing when you're meditating on a Buddha, what you're actually doing, it's meditating on those qualities, because you're projecting those qualities into that image. And the moment you are projecting on them and seeing them, you are starting to have those qualities present on your reality. So you're starting to see them and make them part of your reality. And the more you meditate on them, the more present they are, like, and you're creating like a mind habit of having them consciously present in you. And then you can bring those into you and integrate them and be that Buddha and be those qualities and bring them into the world, right? And
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's kind of the purpose of mythology, and why, whether you're following a religion, like let's say you like Hindu mythology and you're praying to Lakshmi for abundance, it's the same thing, right? Like it's hard to think, okay, I need to think more positively about money. It's easier for our social brain to think, let me be like this person, Lakshmi, which maybe, who cares if she exists or not. Same thing for someone who's not spiritual, who really likes Marvel movies, for instance, like they're meditating on Iron Man because he has the qualities that we want to have as a hero, or meditating on Batman or something, or even something dark like meditating on the Joker. Like a lot of men get drawn into this Joker character. Why? Because even though he's evil, he validates certain parts of ourselves. A lot of men have a Joker in them that wants to like just burn shit or ruin things because they feel bad, and it feels good to watch a movie that validates your emotions.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting nowadays about entertainment and video games and movies, right? We connect with those aspects that maybe we don't feel unconsciously, because we are actually projecting them into those characters that are in the movie, but we're connecting with those patterns that we somehow feel they are important for us, but we are not experiencing them because we have a 9-to-5 job where we don't live adventure. We are not following our mission, our passion. We feel totally disconnected, and we can live all that. Our psyche can channel all that through these movies and these video games, and that's kind of an outlet for that.
Yeah, that's why actually in my archetype challenge, I have a lesson, which is basically look at what you seek for entertainment. Like, what kind of characters do you like watching or playing or listening to? Like, whether you think of it or not, whether you listen to Joe Rogan or like watching Batman movies, like there's some, if you're drawn to that for entertainment, there's some part of you that probably wants to be like that character. And it's an easy way towards self-discovery, I think.
And when attraction comes, do you think that there can also be like a complete rejection to some type of archetype, like some type of quality or some type of pattern, when you have like complete allergy to that and you kind of want to eliminate it from existence, that you would say that would generate all this also conflict and polarization in the world? Like, kind of, I don't want warriors, like, and you can totally like not see them, feel total rejection, and you want to delete that aspect of reality.
It seems, I can't prove this, of course, but many people have observed that when you really are fighting against something, when you're having like an allergic reaction, like you said, it's probably something you need to integrate the most, actually. And that's where you see someone who who like rejects the idea of warrior, who says, oh, everyone should be peaceful, and anger is an evil thing, you should never feel that. Those are the people that tend to have the worst control of their anger, or it comes up, or it festers in some way, or they become passive aggressive, or they're full of resentment, and then it comes out in some unconscious way later. You know, people who are like, yeah, I get angry sometimes and I punch the punching bag, they usually don't have the same issues. I mean, they've integrated that. It's like, yes, my anger is a thing that I use at times, or I let out in a controlled way. Yeah, it just seems that problems always happen. I mean, it's different than, say, you know, I think a lot of women, if they were to watch some movie about warriors, or, you know, a feminine person, a person who doesn't have a masculinity really in them, maybe doesn't care about, it's like, okay, that seems kind of boring, I don't feel strongly one way or another. That probably means they don't have that in them, and that's cool. That's cool. But if you, any strong emotion probably means there's something of that in you.
And that's kind of the paradox, right? Because, for example, you can say you shouldn't have rage, like rage shouldn't exist, and when you see someone in rage, you like start, your rage comes out against rage, and it's kind of a paradox, because you're like, no rage, but you are in rage, right? And it's like you're trying to eliminate something by being that you really don't want to see in the world. And that's what the unconscious can do when you don't have like a conscious recognition of the energies that are inside you and use them wisely, but they can actually own you unconsciously.
Yeah, for sure. And going back to what we said earlier about like masculine, feminine integration, it doesn't seem to work to just like numb out an emotion. Like it doesn't go away. What seems to work is feeling your feelings in a grounded way, right? Like a lot of guys, I mean, traditionally men strive to be stoic and like unemotional, or seeming. But men who try to suppress their emotions, it always comes out. There's always some tell. It always shows up in their face, or shows up in their unconscious behavior, as opposed to, say, to just use the rage. Someone who really channels his rage can do it in a fluid way. And that's what allows him to be stable when something hard happens.
Totally. So, Danny.
Muy, muy interesante todo este tema, a mí me apasiona, todo lo relacionado con los arquetipos también ha sido algo muy importante en mi trabajo estos últimos años. Y sí, la verdad que también quiero ahora preguntar, porque creo que tiene mucho, para mí ha tenido mucha relación, aunque puedan ser cosas diferentes, y sé que también es parte del trabajo prioritario y central de Ruwan. Lo digo porque en mi caso la parte del trabajo con arquetipos y el trabajo del cultivo y del dominio, ¿no?, de tu energía al final, porque si no, puede que cuando te metes en un trabajo arquetípico, si no empiezas también a generar maestría en tu energía, pues pueden llegar problemas importantes a tu vida. Y quería preguntarle sobre la importancia que tiene para él y para el trabajo con hombres, el que los hombres aprendan a dominar y a cultivar su excitación y su energía sexual. ¿Qué pesos tiene para él? ¿Qué importancia tiene esto para realmente transformar la vida de un hombre?
Yeah, so very related to consciously owning all these psychological patterns that are inside us, comes also owning our energy and our impulses. So the question that Danny is asking is, what role does it have, especially like our most primal impulse, our impulse for procreation, sexuality? What is the importance, because it's one of your main focuses also, mastering arousal, mastering sexual impulse? What do you think about that, and why is that important? Because it's something that it's not talked about in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if we go all the way back, or we go back to the roots, I mean, what defines males and females is sex. That's why there are males and females. If you go back to the earliest life forms, right, it's for us to mix our chromosome and have babies. So almost all of our behaviors, and specifically the behaviors that are different between men and women, come from this. And on a more human side of things, you could argue that all of our desires evolved from this need of our genes to make more babies, to continue to exist. So it's important to have a sense of that, because if you look at some of the darkest impulses, you could say rape, that's a sexual impulse, obviously. That's a sexual impulse that maybe never found a healthy outlet earlier. So now it's going into this extreme negative event. And even on a smaller level, I think guys who don't have a handle on their sexual drive, either they don't have it because they've numbed out like I did in my past, or it's so strong and they can't stabilize it. They usually tend to not have happy lives. It's kind of hard, to have a happy existence, especially when you're young, if you don't have fulfilling sexual experiences. And this drive of sex, as I said, kind of ties together all of, people have argued this is why men try to build skyscrapers and businesses and advanced science. It's also they can get laid, right? I mean, on some subconscious level, maybe. So it's important to be able to have a handle on this drive and use it positively and use it for health. And yeah, I think that comes from just being able to handle the arousal on the most basic level, to be able to handle the arousal in your body, feel higher and higher levels of arousal without feeling you need to watch porn and ejaculate or immediately come or go crazy, be able to use it to give you a feeling of aliveness for your life.
It's interesting because once you start practicing practicing mastering sexual arousal, it's maybe you're not used to, as a man, to hold sexual energy or hold ejaculation, and then after a week, 2 weeks, like everything starts burning inside your body, and it's like, what the hell, I didn't even know that was inside me, that was possible to have that strength inside me. And it can really, you need the tools to be able to handle it. And you can see like the importance and the force that has inside us, how much it drives us. Like sexual energy, it's huge inside us. And I'm curious, what do you think that when it comes to sexual mastery, although you work especially with men, but you've been a lot with women in all this field, do you think that mastering sexuality and sexual arousal is different for men and women?
For sure, because men typically lose energy and get sleepy when they ejaculate, and women typically don't feel the same way when they orgasm. So yeah, I mean, many different schools of thought say something like women should have many orgasms and men should have less, essentially. So I mean, that's like kind of the Taoist way of looking at it. And yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. Like, if a man can learn how to cultivate arousal, have a lot of sex, not come all the time, you just have to do it once to notice, wow, I feel really awake. Like I feel really excited for life, as opposed to like, I don't care. Like just that by itself is useful. Like, I think it makes you a better husband, a better boyfriend, just to be, it's like your body's like, oh, we're not done yet, so let's not die. Let's not fall asleep. So yeah, I think it's a useful thing.
So, for example, just so our audience, because we normally speak about this through the lenses of already knowing or having contact with all this culture, but when it comes to people that are new and now are listening to sexual mastery, how would it look like, and what would be the difference from a man, the experience of a man having gone through the process of mastering its sexuality, and the experience of a man that just haven't done that work and it's just living its sexuality in autopilot?
Mm-hmm. I think the simplest way to imagine this for people is, let's say with the man's body, you have a certain container, like you can just imagine like a balloon or a container that can hold your sexual energy. And for a lot of men, the more aroused they get, the more they tighten, like they clench and they make it like tighter. And so it's fuller and fuller. And of course, when something's full, you want to ejaculate. Like typically the closer a guy gets to orgasm, the tighter and tighter he gets and the more he needs to orgasm. Whereas the most basic skill is to be able to feel more and more and more arousal, but instead expand. And if you just imagine, if you imagine arousal as a liquid or a substance, a bigger and bigger container means you're not going to burst as soon. And if you can have a huge container, you can have a lot of arousal, and then you don't have to go immediately, and you don't get blue balls, and you don't feel strange, and you don't feel like you don't feel tense. That's the basic skill of learning how to relax under feeling a lot of sensation, which I think translates far outside of sexual experiences, like even going to the emotions we were talking about, to be able to feel a lot of anger without feeling like you have to burst, be able to feel a lot of grief without feeling like you have to cry and be a mess. Like that I think is like the most masculine skill or virtue of being able to handle a lot. It's not about you don't feel any feelings, it's that your container is so big that you can feel a lot of arousal, you can feel a lot of emotions, and everything is still stable.
Yeah, it's like having the ability to hold all the tensions in your experience and presence them without them carrying you into having an automatic reaction to the world through them, right? And that's right. I'm curious also, what's your take on, because that's we relate it to as a masculine trait, being able to hold that presence and hold all that tension and all that emotion and all that inner energy. For women that are listening, would it be different, or is it also part of their work to learn how to manage their masculine energy and be able also to hold those tensions and those energies?
I think it's useful for anyone to be able to handle a lot of feeling. Kind of my opinion, I don't think is as important for women. I think what they have to lose is less big than what men have to lose by being unstable. Maybe you have to ask a woman. Actually, my girlfriend might be because she practices similar practices. I don't want to comment too much on women's bodies, but what I have heard from a lot of women who practice this stuff is that by doing similar practices, they can have bigger and bigger orgasms and more pleasure. And that I think is useful.
And it's interesting because the same dynamic that goes inside us, right, with the holding with presence from the masculine energy, all these waves and emotions and all these waves of energy, that would be more of the feminine polarity of reality. It also shows up when it comes to relationship, when it comes to connecting with a woman. The way we are able to relate with those aspects of us will be also the way we relate outside of us, when outer emotion and outer waves of energy come from another person, how we can be able to hold and connect and interact with that, right?
Yeah, for sure. The feminine likes to be uncontained, or likes to be uncontained by the masculine. And that's kind of what women lean on men for when women date men, typically. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when it comes to speaking about sexuality, what do you think about pornography, and what impact is it having in men's health or men's sexual habits?
I think by itself, it's fine, or it's a thing, but internet pornography, specifically for men or boys even, like the fact that most boys going through puberty have unlimited access to every kind of woman in every kind of situation, like it's just bad for your brain. It's bad for your brain. It gives you a dopamine hit without the oxytocin hit, which is why a lot of men feel lonely. They might jerk off all the time. It's kind of designed to be addictive in the same way. I should say, if an adult man who has a healthy sex life wants to watch porn sometimes, I think it can, just like, drinking is okay in moderation, but it is an addictive substance. And I think when done too much, it can make it hard to connect with your own sexuality and also real women. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of guys who can watch porn and have a healthy sexual function, but when they're having sex with their girlfriend, they need to jerk off to a porn thought. They can't ejaculate, they can't come otherwise, or like they can't even get aroused unless they have many tabs open of many different images in their mind or something. And that's not going to lead to healthy experiences. I mean, nothing artificial should be better than the real thing. It's yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. Like nothing superficial should be should be as interesting as the real thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's designed to be addictive. It's designed to get people to look at it more than they look at their own lives, for instance. And and for that reason, it tends to be a medium of unconsciousness for people, even though by itself it should be okay. Who cares what you watch? But it's so addictive. It could just lead you down a bad path in your mind. So in general, I think it's not the best thing to do.
Yeah, you talk a lot about also dopamine detox, right? Mm-hmm. So how necessary it is from time to time, at least, just to be able to disconnect for all this overstimulation and all these dopamine shots that we're receiving constantly, to be able to connect with ourselves and not make that just run our reality, because we lose motivation for life and for normal things from day-to-day life, because they don't seem as interesting as just scrolling down Instagram and seeing exciting stuff every second.
Yeah. And I think one of the worst things is that when you always have that opportunity for a new thing or a new idea from someone else, you don't get to think your own thoughts. Like that's something that's been lost of our generation, is that, it's so normal. My friends think I'm crazy because I blocked all my social media feeds. But like, it's crazy to look at a social media feed. It's designed to get you addicted. So 30 minutes go by and you've just been consuming other thoughts and you can't think your own thoughts. Like men used to sit and think. That used to be part of, whether you were a writer, who cares? Or you could be whatever. Men used to sit and think. And that was one of the most fulfilling things for a man to do, is to just sit and think about life, come up with his ideas, talk to his friends, talk to other men about his ideas. But when guys are on their phone all the time, people are on their phone, you don't have space for your own thoughts anymore. And, anyway, I think it's the biggest thing that takes away the color from people's lives, are all these addictive media things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been moments, not like, and I experienced it not long ago, where I was actually sitting down and I was saying, hey, do you remember what it was to be bored? Like, I don't even remember what it was to be bored, I want to re-experience that. And I had to cut off everything. I had to cut off the phone, the internet, everything, to actually be able to sit down and say, oh, that's amazing. I'm being bored for a while. Like so refreshing to settle down and just leave just everything.
Yeah. And then you get to think, okay, what do I actually want to think about? Or what do I actually want to consume? Yeah. Maybe it's I want to listen to a podcast or read a book, or maybe I do want to watch a video, but let me be conscious of my choices, of what I do with my attention, so that my mind can expand rather than just become dead.
Yeah, totally. So, Dani, ¿quieres hacer alguna pregunta?
Sí. Sí, la verdad que sobre todo, bueno, con todo lo que estamos escuchando, más que una pregunta es una reflexión que me surge con todo lo que comenta Ruwan sobre la pornografía, ¿no? Y sobre todo la manera que se usa en esta sociedad. Me ha pasado que hablando con hombres de mucha confianza para mí, amigos, a veces cuando les hablas de estas cosas y del daño realmente que hace cuando sales tanto de tu cuerpo y todo se convierte en una fantasía mental a través de millones de imágenes y de una intimidad que también hay una parte que seguramente hombres que no tienen la posibilidad, por lo que sea, porque tienen traumas, porque no consigue conectar con las mujeres. Es entendible que esa parte de esa intimidad se busque a través del porno, de ver que tienes millones de mujeres, millones de imágenes y escenas para apagar tu sed o calmar tu necesidad de intimidad, pero para mí es uno de los grandes peligros y una de las grandes necesidades que hay. Y me ocurre cuando hablo con hombres que muchos de ellos siento que te miran como diciendo, ¿sabes? Hay una defensa por su parte, pero al mismo tiempo percibo, ¿no?, esa necesidad de que quieren algo diferente, pero no saben cómo encontrarlo y da miedo salir de ahí. Y nada, simplemente es eso, comentar que yo no tengo nada en contra del porno, pero creo que cuando no hay una conciencia corporal y cuando hay una presencia contigo mismo, está totalmente descontrolado dentro de la experiencia de los hombres y lo que lleva es a una total desconexión y a la larga con uno mismo y después con las mujeres y con las posibles relaciones. Entonces sí, es un tema tan interesante y que, bueno, es una de las partes que queremos meter el dedo en la llaga aquí en Warriors of Love, y la conversación con Ruwan lo está permitiendo. Así que bueno, no era pregunta, era esta reflexión que me vino y quería dejarla aquí en Spanglish, Spanish.
Yes, Danny was reflecting on porn use and how we, as when we disconnect from what we are experiencing and just falling into our mind, like how he sees that that is having a negative impact in men around him, and also the barrier that a lot of men have when they hear about all these topics. They are kind of taboo. They hear you speaking about just maybe just stopping porn or building arousal or holding, yeah, doing all these kinds of practices. They normally tend to have a first like negative reaction of, or try to protect themselves from going there. It's like, okay, I don't want to know about that. What are you saying about? What are you talking about? I don't really want to go there.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, they're, given the state of our world, they seem weird. They seem like weird things to talk about because the world is weird. The world has become this thing where things that are not healthy have become normal. So yes, speaking about the healthy things sometimes seems strange.
Revolutionary, right?
Yeah.
So if you had to give, for example, for a man or a man that's here listening right now, and he has like this impulse of starting to leave mediocrity and his status quo to open up to his hero's journey, to be able to follow his path, to grow and to start developing. When he wants to do that shift on the way he relates to himself and to the world, what would you say would be like, what tip would you give him right now for that first step to continue that process or to start that process?
Well, if such a man is just starting, it should be an exciting time. It should, if maybe most people get into their own development because of a problem, and they discover a new world. That's the whole initial. That's the call to action in the hero's journey. It's like, oh, there's a whole new thing of whatever it is. You should be fascinated enough that there are some things that you want to learn more about or want to do more of, and you have to follow that interest. The saddest thing, I think, is when a guy recognizes something that's interesting, or that he recognizes the new world, and then he doesn't enter it. He doesn't learn more, explore more. Like, I think in the beginning, all you have to do is just follow what's interesting to you. It should seem fascinating to you. Otherwise, it's not really a hero's journey. A lot of people say no because of fear, but I guess the only thing I would say is don't say no to your new interests because of fear. Find out how deep it goes, how much you can change, that maybe you can be a totally different person for the better in some amount of time. That's it's why we watch it in the movies. It's such a fulfilling journey.
Yeah, and that's that I would say it's kind of the keyword, fascination. Just don't be afraid, right, of that. It's scary because you're getting out of your ways of being and relating, to opening to new experiences. You're getting out of your comfort zone, and maybe you have to do things or explore things that also in your social circles will seem uncommon, but it's a fascinating journey, and that's why we are creating also this community to be able to connect with people that are also in the same process, and that's what really makes that shift so long-term beneficial. Like there's a little bit of discomfort, but when it comes to following it, the rewards are so big. So great. Thank you very much, Ruwan, for being here with us. Thank you very much for being in our project. We are starting now with our first interview, so it was great to
cool.
have you here, and we're very grateful for having your support there. If our community wants to know more about you or go deeper into your work, where can they find you?
They can check out ruwando.com, or look at my podcast. Ruwando podcast has all of my ideas there. So if you like that stuff, you can learn more.
It's a great podcast. I totally recommend it for everyone that's listening to subscribe and to listen to the conversations, because they're very, very, very interesting conversations. Dani?
Nada más, muchísimas gracias, Ruwan, también para que vaya aprendiendo él un poco español, en español. Muchas gracias por este tiempo tan bonito contigo, tan inspirador. Y bueno, ya eres parte de nuestra comunidad. Esperemos que mucha gente en España, hombres y mujeres, puedan también conocer tu bello y poderoso trabajo. Y nada, vamos a seguir conectados y lo dicho, un auténtico placer tenerte aquí.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
So remember, everyone that's listening, that this podcast is also subtitled in Spanish for everyone that wants to go through it again with subtitles. You have it there in YouTube, and remember also that you have all the links there in the description to connect with Ruwan and to connect with us. So thank you very much for being here, and we see you in the next podcast.